Ryder Carroll is a New York Times bestselling author, digital product designer, and inventor of the bullet journal method. He's been featured by the New York Times, LA Times, Fast Company, the Wall Street Journal, BBC, Vogue, Bloomberg, and others. Ryder, welcome to Hustle and Grace.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm delighted to have you. You're calling in from the other side of the world in Australia, which is pretty fun. Um, would you mind just starting off by just sharing with our listeners sort of your 30,000-foot career trajectory, and where does bullet journal inventor fit in there? Just kind of give us a perspective of the journey.
Sure. I started off as a web designer and then became a product designer. So building applications from banking to video games, all that interfaces specifically. I was a user interface designer. And all along the way, I had been developing the system, even from middle school, to help me be more focused and organized. So I grew up with learning disabilities, and eventually I was diagnosed with ADHD. And at the time, I don't want to date myself here, there was no internet. So I had no resources available to me. And over the years, I created my own resources, and the only tool I really had available, which was my paper notebook. And then when I became a product designer and a digital designer, I started using a lot of this design methodology and applying it rather than to a product to my own life, right? So I developed all these systems, and eventually I came up with this methodology known as the bullet journal method. And yeah, now I do that full time.
Yeah. So you came up with this method, and then at some point it became sort of this viral sensation, like every beautiful picture of a journal on Pinterest or on Instagram was the bullet journal method. And what was that experience like? Like something that lived in your head, then you see it everywhere you go online. What was that like?
It was wild, and it was also a bit confusing, which is something we can get into, because I would see things that were quote unquote a bullet journal that in my experience were not at all what I was doing. And that is a common misconception. I think the big misconception is that people think that a bullet journal is a very elaborate, artistic, beautiful notebook. And it can be that. It absolutely can be. But when I first start seeing them, that kind of defeats the purpose. The whole idea is figuring out why you're doing what you're doing. It's to make the most out of your time, to be productive, right? And when I see these things at the beginning, it seemed like, wow, people are really investing a lot in their planning and not so much in their doing. And that was like one of the first misconceptions on my part too. Sure, there are some people who spend all day planning and not doing. That exists also in the community, but there are a lot of bullet journalists, and this is part of what I love about what I do, is like, no, the whole point about bullet journaling is living an intentional life, as you said. And like, yes, that's true. It's like, for me, sitting down, spending time with my thoughts through illustration, through color, is a way for me to connect with myself. And I was like, oh, wow, you're actually doing the thing that I was trying to convey in a completely different way. Like the expression of the same principles is there. So the way I express those principles is very different from other people, especially people who tend to post on very visual platforms like Pinterest and Instagram. It's a very specific demographic of bullet journal users. And that's, I think, the wildest part in general, is for me to learn what people do with these tools that I design to address needs that I could never even comprehend, and making it so much more than I could ever do on my own.
Yeah, that's gotta be wild. I mean, it's almost like writing a hit song and then it means something to someone else that you weren't thinking about those things when you were writing it, but then it sort of like transforms in someone else's hands. I think bullet journaling seems to be this really incredible amalgamation of thinking about the future and planning, being organized, living intentionally, reflecting on the past, being creative, and then doing it all in community, which I think is a really key piece. Was that your vision for this from the very beginning, all of those components?
No, not at all. For me, it was about being really present. That's ultimately, first, the bullet journal was there to help me become more productive, to help me, meet my goals, and I did. but they always felt really empty. And I realized that there was a really big disconnect between what I thought I wanted and what I actually did want. And the only way to really understand what you want is to check in with what is actually happening to you right now, to check in with every experience, which immediately becomes the past. Did this give me energy? Did it take it away? Is this something that I want more of? Is this something that I was less of? And paying attention to those parts of my life allowed me to make very informed decisions moving forward, right? Like I think a lot of people want things that they have no concept of, right? They're like, oh, I want $1 million. I want the white picket fence. I want all these things. And I understand why people want those things, because they're like, oh, that is the thing that will make me happy eventually, right? If I get that, then check happiness. In my own experience, that's not at all how it works. And how do I know what's going to make me happy? Based on a huge assumption, whereas I have an entire lifetime full of things I know make me happy. Like, how do I recreate some of those things? Okay, so spending time with people who are smarter than me, that's something that gives me energy, right? So I can recreate that, as opposed to maybe if I buy a house, I'll be happy. So that's kind of what the bullet journal is about, is like really paying very close attention to what is happening right now, so you can make much more informed decisions that are really aligned with things that you do value right now.
I love that. And it's kind of putting those pillars in place, right? I'm curious to know what other tools or habits or what other rhythms you have in your life, in addition to the bullet journal, that help you with mindfulness and being present.
Well, I definitely meditate. I'm a regular meditator as well. I think the two are kind of extensions of one another, if you will, right? It's about becoming aware of what you're thinking, and not necessarily becoming your thinking and your thoughts. And in general, like for me, journaling is a way of observing your thinking as well. So in addition to bullet journaling, I also do long form journaling, which is again related in this Venn diagram. And then you have like meditation as well. And in bullet journal, the thing that's often not realized is that bullet journal is a method, right? It's not the notebook, the methodology. And the methodology has various rituals in it. So it's not just what I'm writing, but it's when I'm writing and what I'm reading and how I'm reading. So yes, bullet journaling is actively writing in your notebook, but then there's these rituals that you can't really portray online because it's just time that you're taking to read.
Right.
And those are really important extensions of simply writing things down. It's what do you do with what you write down? How do you think about it? How do you move those pieces?
That sounds key. One thing I immediately noticed when reading your book is that we want to become good stewards of not only our time, but also our energy. And so I read that in your book, and then I started seeing it, like the topic of like energy was everywhere. It was like big, like aha moment for me. And I love that you pointed that out, because optimizing time and saving time is great. But if you're burnt out and spent, it's really not doing you that much good, right? So how can we have awareness about our energy reserves? Like, what are your tips around that?
Tracking your experience, right? I feel like we don't remember things accurately, and we're terrible at guessing things. The only thing we have is the experience. And once we start focusing on what we want to get some wisdom around, then we can start tracking it. It's like, okay, I want to start tracking my energy levels. So every day you're like, okay, you're using your bullet journal, be like, okay, I did this, gave me energy. I did this, took away energy, and do that over a period of time. And then you start to get a pretty accurate map of your energy, if you will. And that changes all the time as well. It can change with the seasons, it can change with the type of work, it can change with the type of relationships you're in. And it's just a way to help us check in with ourselves in our current environment, in our current moment in time, in our current season, right? What is our energy level in this season across our different responsibilities?
I'm curious to know too, your thoughts on just like planner culture. So what do you think about productivity culture, time management gurus? Like, What do you think in general they're missing most? Or what do you feel is out of alignment with what you know to be true? Maybe is a better way to ask.
Yeah, I guess one is that there is no system that you can ever have that will make you happy, right?
Mm,
I think I think people are doing all this stuff in reward for happiness. And I think that a lot of the literature I read, like you do this for joy and you'll do this for happiness. And that becomes the goal for a lot of productivity, right? And for me, I find that that's what is happiness. That's an emotion. And like all other emotions, it comes and it goes. And using that as your metric for success is really dangerous because even if you succeed, chances are you won't be happy in a day from now, a week from now, a month from now. It will go away. And then all of a sudden, success seems questionable. So I feel for me, the thing is to optimize towards meaning, things that feel meaningful, because even if you're having a bad day, you still believe in what you're doing. So that's a big one. And another one is like, you'll never get everything done. That shouldn't be the goal. The goal is not to get everything done. The goal is to be working on things, on the right things at the right time. That's pretty much it. I think a wonderful book about this is 4,000 Weeks, really, where we, I think one thing I see in a lot of planner culture is I believe he calls it, there's an incredible amount of time, I believe he says clearing the decks, which we spend a lot of time getting everything just right to actually begin working. It's like, okay, I just have to clean the kitchen and then I'm going to pick up this and that, and then I'm going to sit down, I'm going to get to work. And what happens is like, that's all you ever do. You're constantly in a world where you're just clearing the decks, getting ready to do the work. And I find myself in this position as well. It's like, I'm going to make everything just so, and then finally there's going to be no distraction and the great work will commence. And that's just not true. It's just not true. It's like, you just have to start working. Right. And then let's get on the field and then start playing the game and seeing what you really need to do and just optimize for what is most meaningful, most urgent and meaningful, that kind of thing. I feel like myself included, we're always looking for the system where I will just eventually have more time
right.
to do everything that I want to do. And one day I'll figure out a way to do that. And I believe that that's just not there. It's like, you just have to take time now. That's it. You take the time. You will never get everything done. You're that's not the goal. The goal is to work on things that matter as much as you possibly can.
Absolutely. One last question for you. Why is analog so important? Why, uh, your book is so much around just picking up a pen or picking up a pencil. Why is moving back to writing instead of typing important?
Yeah, I can only speak for me, but as somebody who grew up with ADHD, which I feel like the symptoms of ADHD are pretty commonplace these days in a world of digital distraction, right? Executive
Yeah.
dysfunction, can't focus on anything, limited attention span, all these things. Yeah, for me, it makes me go offline is the shortest answer that I have. I don't have to learn how to use anything. It's quiet time. As soon as I open my notebook, there's no more notifications. I simply have to stop and think and check in with myself. And I can do that the way that feels most natural. I don't have to learn somebody else's schema and I don't have to like download anything. Yeah, it's just time for myself to stop and think and to process. And I feel like we spend so much time trying to figure out how to get things done faster. And I feel like convenience is not necessarily a good measure of productivity, right? When it comes to thinking about my life, it's important to slow down, right? I don't want to get through my life. That's not that's not the goal. The goal is to really make sure that I'm taking time for the things that really matter. And in a life where things come at you so fast, it's easy to miss those things. It's easy to not realize that something is really meaningful to you until you sit down. You're like, oh, wow, I've been spending a lot of time with this person and that's really meaningful to me. Or it's actually bringing me really far down. And like, I was blaming it on my partner, or I was blaming it on my job, or, writing things down by hand helps me process it. It helps me externalize my thinking. And I feel like when I type or I do things digitally, it moves too fast and I miss the details, right? I'm just kind of hurrying through it. It's like copy and paste. No. What happened today? What mattered? What gave me energy? What do I want more of? What do I want less of? And the beautiful thing about bullet journaling is I figure out a way to keep that relatively short, right? Like traditional journaling didn't work for me because I do have a limited attention span. And it started to feel like a chore. It's like, I don't want to write 3 pages. I want to take 45 minutes to like deconstruct my entire like existential life right now. I just going to write down 5 things that are important to me right now, things that I don't want to forget. And then I'm going to do that again tomorrow and the next day. And in writing those things out, in having to slow down, and also because it's slower, I pick my words more carefully. So it helps me really train my ability to articulate my needs and my experience in a way that typing doesn't. Because with typing, there's no resistance. If I don't get it right, I'll just, delete it and do it again. But like if I'm writing it by hand, like this is going to take a moment. So I'm going to take an additional moment to think. And I feel like if everybody took just a little bit more time to consider why they're doing what they're doing, I think they just have a less suffering in their life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I write so much slower than I type. And so it is a good practice because it kind of slows my mind down a little bit in a good way, from taking all of the information in and just moving quickly. A bonus question that I just thought of. What's inspiring you lately? Like, where is your head right now? Like, what are you thinking about? What are you mulling over?
Values, the concept of values, and how it's like everywhere and nowhere at the same time in terms of our personal education. You should have values. Values are super important. Who taught you to have values? Are your values correct? What is that based off of? So those are kind of, I like to challenge my own assumptions, especially when I'm talking about intentional living. Like, what does it mean to live an intentional life? It's like, well, live according to your values. Okay, where do those come from? What do those mean? So that's something I've been spending a lot of time in. And also education in general. Like that's with the work that I do, I'm always trying to find different ways to be able to turn information into understanding. And there's so many different types of bullet journalists out there who come from so many different backgrounds and so many different needs that like you can't teach the same thing the same way because people can't see themselves in it. And I feel like really good education can turn anything interesting by showing you why it's necessary in your life. And we have many different people. So for me, I'm trying to create a team of people who can help me serve more people. And that's a really difficult and very exciting challenge.
Absolutely. Well, we all have time and energy that needs to be optimized. So I wish you well on that journey, and I hope you find the right players to help you reach people. Well, Ryder, where can our listeners find you online or connect with you?
Sure. Everything's on bulletjournal.com or at bullet journal on most social channels.
Right on. All right. Thanks, Ryder. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.